I was 8 when I first attempted business. I had made about my father's salary.
At 8 years old?
At the age of 8. During school, I would buy meat pie, drinks for people I was cool with. I remember I used to buy for Funke Akindele too at the time because we attended the same primary school.
Hi, my name is Nene Ikako. Welcome to our fireside chat at SMESHOP. On today's fireside chat, we have the Executive Director for Africa at the Under40CEOs. Welcome, Mr. Fab.
Thank you very much for having me, Nene. Amazing initiative. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'd like to get to know you and know your story. Tell me about Mr. Fab.
Mr. Fab is quite complex. But I'm guessing you want to meet Mr. Fab, the businessman,
yes.
right? Maybe a little bit of, insight into my journey.
Absolutely.
In business.
Absolutely.
So I like to start from the very beginning. Like The Sound of Music says, is a very good place to start. Right. So I was 8, right? When I first attempted business. And how did this happen? I mean, right opposite my, house at the time was a printing press. This printing press had like waste paper in drums right outside it, strips of white paper. I would go in there and just, take as much as I could, chopped it up into bits, made jotters, stapling machine, white and, red and blue, big pen, created what I call the star jotter. And then I took it to school for myself, and then people, started to get interested. I would give a few out for free, and then after a while, I'm like, no way, I should be selling this because people actually do want it. So I got more strips, cut more, of those, made more jotters, sold. And I recall that, in that month, before I was shut down by competition, who was a teacher in the school at the time, I had made about my father's salary.
At 8 years old?
At the age of 8. And I blew it all. I mean, I was just the big boy in school. During school, I would buy meat pie, buy drinks for people I was cool with. I remember I used to buy for Funke Akindele too at the time because we attended the same primary school. And, after school, buy the ice cream and all of that. So that was my first time. But of course, I didn't know what it was. I was shut down because they said, oh, as a student, you can't sell
things in school.
Things, and it's made me rather passionate about, improving a lot, or even the chances of success for young business people at whatever age.
Yes.
If they show promise, enable them rather than shut them down. But I was shut down, and then of course by the time I was just before I went to uni. I took this computer engineering course, and I think that was my first registered business, right? Where I would clone computers and, basically I was selling. I think my father's office was the first company that I sold to. And the pitch then was, you know what? You guys have typewriters and everything. The world is moving away from this and all. Why don't I just build you something? It's cheaper. So maybe computers were selling for 150,000 at the time. I was able to come up with something for 80,000 naira. But I would train all your staff, to be able to use the computer. And of course, there will be after sales services. And I did that before I even resumed school. But of course, Nigerian parents,
you have to
when you get to school, face your studies, face your book, like they would say. So I sort of dropped it until, I was faced with a dilemma again in school. I didn't have enough pocket money. In fact, what I got was just enough to feed me for a day. And then I'm like, okay, how am I going to survive this? So I looked at, okay, people were looking for bed space. I sold my bed space for 3,000 naira at the time. So maybe I got fed for about 10 days. Now I'm homeless, and then
hungry.
I'm hungry as well. So I'm like, okay, what do I do at this point? And I recall, I found out that most people, because I was a science student, right? And we had these lab classes that required that we wear our lab coats.
The coats.
But a lot of the students usually wouldn't be bothered to buy one.
Yes.
So they would rent some raggedy coats from this, Baba at the time. I remember that we used to call him Baba Sherry, and people who were watching this, who were there at the time, would definitely know Baba Sherry and his lab coats, dirty, raggedy. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I raise some money, produce some, lab coats, keep them in pristine condition, and I can rent these out. So I produced my first 10. I would eventually, grow it to, about 50. And of course, like I say, my money problems were over for the longest time. From there, I moved on to fashion accessories, with a company I called Ties, etc. At the time. And then, I moved on to music. So how did music come about? I was roommates with a gentleman called, that as LD the Don. I know him as Olarewaju Sikirulai Dabiri. And of course, it was already, with this two other guys called tribesmen, trying to build, a record label to promote and manage, other artists besides themselves. And I would watch them basically struggle, with just putting things together. So LD and of course Freestyle and KB were there trying to do their thing. They had some tapes and, just like, how do we run this? And I remember this particular day, I think there was an interview with Ovation magazine. Okay. And this gentleman called Ayoshu, he had come with another gentleman called Sami Hassan at the time. Everybody knows him as Sage today.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yes,
so they both worked for Ovation magazine at the time. And they had come to, do this interview. And, I was there, busy basically trying to put them together nicely, tell them, why don't you do this? Why don't you say this? And Ayoshun just looks at me at some point and said, why don't you just manage these guys? You seem to know exactly what they should be doing. And that's how I got in the music industry. And basically as the vice president A&R at Tribe Records. And I ran Tribe Records for many years until I moved on to start another record label. I hardly ever talk about that, but I did start another record label called Zionic Records with a focus on gospel music at the time. So I remember we produced and distributed Dekunle Fuji's second album. We distributed, marketed Kush. Kush's album on behalf of DKG Music in LA at the time. We also ran a couple of projects for Word Records, Jackie Velasquez, Winans Phase 2 in Nigeria. And, at that point as well, I was already thinking fashion, right? And yes, I couldn't really afford, you did mention of a TM Lewin shirt. I couldn't afford the TM Lewin shirts. They were 7,500 naira at the time, and for a student who has pocket money of 300 naira and just basically trying to survive. So what do we do? So I decided to do some research into, these shirts were popular. All the club boys were wearing it. And I'm like, okay, what is it about these shirts? I did some research. Egyptian cotton, the 22 component collars, the cut, so I went, the
slim fit.
So I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me go find out where I can get, similar fabric and all that. So I remember going to Tejo Market in Yaba at the time. I looked for fabric and I found, something decent, something close. And then I would sit with a tailor, and basically attempt to put one together. And the first, iteration of that product, everybody actually thought it was a TM Lewin shirt when I wore it, because I'd made it for me. Then I made the second one, and then people said, "Oh, where did you get it from?" I'm like, "This is my brand." I'm like, "What's it called?" I'm like, "I don't know." Nothing just yet. And then that got me thinking, so it has to be called something. Eventually it became Exclamations Couture. And we're selling our shirts for 2,500 naira.
I remember I had
as
one
opposed to 7,500. And a lot of students started buying from me. And so that took off as well. And of course we grew it to the point where, you know, if you're in banking, for instance, in corporate, if you're not wearing an exclamation shirt, you're not really.
You're not there.
You're not.
The steez.
Your steez is not on 100. You know. So we got there, and then of course, you know, still on this journey and the evolution. At some point, I started to work as a fashion stylist for a number of magazines, and I would make certain recommendations, you know, to these magazines, like, you can make this better, you can do this. And at some point, they're like, no, we're not trying to be GQ, we're not trying to be Vogue, we're not trying to be that. So you know what? Just leave us the way we are. Nigeria loves us the way we are. But I wasn't satisfied, because I would tell some of those magazines that, because I ran my ads in some of those magazines, I said, I'm not comfortable running ads in this space, because I believe that my brand, you know, deserves to be positioned better. And so I remember I had gone for my first fashion show in London, right? And then I met the photographer who worked with me, was married to this lady who was an editor for another magazine, and she wanted to interview me. So in the interview was when I started to share about my dreams of, you know, wanting to publish the #1 fashion and lifestyle magazine from out of Africa. I would call it Fab because it was fabulous, African and black. I mean, Fab also means Familusin Akin Babajide, but you know. And then she was like, stop right there, like, I'm interested in this project. And I think it was about 5-6 months later, I remember flying her down to Lagos, Nigeria, and we went to work pre-producing the magazine. And I think 3 months later, the first issue of the magazine was on the shelf. So that's how I got into media. So media, fashion media, and all, you know, from there we moved to producing radio shows. From there, you know, today we own about 6 TV shows, and then we moved into content distribution with over 200, you know, TV shows, movies, and series on our catalog. And yes, after doing all of this, right, I remember sitting in this same, you know, chairs, and talking to one of my friends who is also, you know, a CEO. His office was just about 5 buildings away, and he had come after work. We're just having a conversation about business, all the challenges we faced, how we've overcome them. And after about an hour, it just struck me that if only we had, you know, young people trying to build or run a business in the room right now, they would have learnt so much from us, and they wouldn't have to make the same mistakes that we had made. And that was when the first thought of, okay, yes, we have to tell the stories. I have to have these conversations. Would I do them online? Will I do them on TV? Will I do them on radio? Would I? And eventually I settled for TV. And I think 2 days later, Under40CEOs came about, and that was the origin of Under40CEOs, which was mainly initially to inspire, motivate, and educate the next generation of business leaders.
That's an amazing story. The journey from 8-year-old to who you are now. Would you say that there was a connecting factor? Was it a survival instinct, or was it just pure creativity in you that you had to birth that ran through the course of you pivoting into where you are now?
So I can't rule out that creativity was a huge part of it, but I would also say that being able to recognize opportunity played an even bigger role. Survival, yes, that was what it was about in the early days. It was more survival, but I think I've grown down to a point of, you know, what problem can I solve? Can I solve it at scale? Are people willing to pay for the solution? And then I go for it.
That's amazing. Yeah. As long as you're giving value for it, that's the most important thing. You've interviewed a lot of CEOs in the course of you running the CEO Under40 CEOs. What has resonated the most amongst the CEOs, and what has been their own struggles, even your own struggles that you've been able to overcome? Has there been one particular voice, one unifier that you could cut across all these CEOs that you've spoken with in the past years?
So struggle. I think one of the major struggles that I've identified with every one of us is that is our product, right? Some of us in the early days had fallen so much in love with our product to the point where we weren't willing to iterate. We weren't willing to allow the product evolve, right? To speak to the audience or to serve the audience's needs. That's the target audience or the market, right? We weren't willing to listen. We were trying to force them into accepting whatever it was we were trying to serve them with, because we just had this amazing idea. It's this or nothing. So that's one common thing that I've found. But at the point where there always comes that sort of inflection point where this thing is not working. So for it to work, what do I need to do? Yeah. And then you start to listen more to your market, and then you start to tweak your product to fit the market needs. And then at some point it clicks and it takes off.
It takes off.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Has there been anything peculiar that has resonated across everyone?
Anything peculiar? So one thing I would say, the peculiar thing is that we've all had challenges, right? And the general notion, and even from the way we tell the stories, we try to tell our CEO stories as authentically as possible, but not many are willing to share the grimy details of their journey. And so it comes off looking like, oh, I just had this idea and then I just put it into a product and then boom. I went to market and people bought it and now what? I'm a billionaire. It doesn't happen that way. There are loads of challenges. And, between ideation and even the product. So people confuse the ideas for the product, right? And they say, people should be willing to buy into the idea. There's no product yet. You haven't refined that idea into something you can go to market with that people are willing to pay for. Yeah. At concept phase, you don't have a product yet. And then you have a product doesn't mean that you have a business yet. Yep. So they're totally different. For it to move from product into being a business, all of from product development to operations to financing to marketing and sales need to be in place. The engine that pushes or drives your product is the business. And a lot of us failed to understand this, but we now do, and we're trying to teach it to the next generation.
That's very key.
Yeah.
So you being able to teach this to the next generation, what key learning would you tell the next person or the next entrepreneur to take note of in his product, in his in his journey towards being a CEO?
What key lessons?
Yes, key lessons.
First of all, don't be too in love with your idea or your product even. So you've gotten your idea to the product phase. Don't take it personal when people tell you, this is not right. If you had made it this way, I'll give you an example. So when I started out in fashion, I used to like the fancy, how as a designer, you want to show how creative you can be, right? So I remember at some point I said, what, to hell with TM Lewin, I want to create my own, signature. So I had these shirts that had collars that were about 5 inches long. So the collars would be like over here, and then it would have like, this has like one pin down, one button down. I would have like 4 or 5. You just wanted to, the sleeves were interesting looking. I just wanted to show them, but that was in my market. So the feedback I was getting was, we don't want this. We want regular shirts we can wear with that. So I'm like, no, this is fashionable. You should buy this. But after a while, when I couldn't sell those pieces, I had to revert back to what they were saying and made exactly what they wanted. So don't be too in love. So you've moved from product phase, you're in business, you're listening to your market. You're now thinking, okay, how do I bring on the right people? Because for you to scale, you need people, right?
Yes.
How do you bring it? So you're at the point where you're trying to hire people. And I've found, so over time, I tend to love people, right? I love people. Like, I love human beings. And I tend to see the best in everyone. And I tend to, so for everybody that came, like, even though this person may not be the right or perfect fit, I'll just take, I'll work with him, and try to make him
Fit.
big mistake, right? Big mistake. And one of the other things I find is we try to pay the least possible, right? But as they say, when you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? If you're not willing to get the very best to work with you, whether you're partnering with them because you can't afford them, or you're actually looking to pay these guys, find the money from anywhere, be sure to always get top talent at whatever level you're in. Identify those needs you can quickly fill. Let's say you're looking to hire 5 people, but can afford to hire just 2, right? Do an opportunity cost. Do a scale of preference. What gaps do you need to immediately fill that would take your business to 2x or 3x, right? That would now enable you to bring on the next 3 to further scale your business. That's one mistake. We always say, oh, let's just get like interns, let's look for NYSC, and then you're struggling. Everybody's just struggling. The business is going nowhere. You're just barely surviving, but we want you to thrive. And people are a key part of ensuring that you thrive as a business.
How do you made mention of a style of clothing that you made, and you realized that it didn't resonate with your market. How do you balance practical innovation and the challenges of trying to ensure that it meets standards? Now you're trying to be creative. It's an innovative idea, but you need it to be standard enough that your target audience or your consumers see the value in it.
Standard enough. That is a big challenge, especially when you're a details person. You want to, a lot of people struggle with their products, right? So you're trying to get the product and you're like, oh, it's not great yet. It's not great yet. You want to get it to a particular standard. What I advise is take it to market. Take it to market. The market will tell you what to do to upgrade to that standard that you so, desire. There's always a market, right? There's always a market for whatever product. Let's look at cars, for instance. We all know that it's kind of tough for people to buy brand new cars these days. It's quite expensive. So you would find that, they either go for, really used cars but I mean, there are times I see cars on display, you just look, for sale. You see it out there and you're like, who's buying this 1992 car? Like, who is buying that in 2024? But then after 1 week, the car's gone. Somebody bought it, right? So there's a market for, and I mean, Nigeria is a really big market. And you would always find that you will plug a gap or the other. You want to iterate over time. I can tell you that even though people thought my product was really great at the beginning, it wasn't really great. 5 years down the line, I saw the difference. I remember, having a conversation with Maya Tafu recently. And we're talking about what he produced in the early days that everybody thought was the very best. And then after, his trainings on Savile Row and everything, what he actually produces now, worlds apart. Don't let that keep you from going to market. You want to produce it, if you're committed to it, you will only get better.
Spotlighting CEO under 40. What common traits have these CEOs exhibited, and what uniqueness did you find in them? And if you don't mind naming a few of those CEOs that you want.
Right. A common trait with under 40 CEOs, especially those that we've seen on TV, we will form part of our platinum members community. is
Resilience, right? A lot of them have been knocked down and knocked down hard a couple of times, but they always find a way to get back up and keep crawling, walking, running, whatever you permit them to at that time. They never take no for an answer. They keep trying to break down walls. They're so persistent, with whatever it is they're trying to build. And, I think that's a recipe for winning in business, and they're winning.
Resilience. That's something that I believe comes strong in you being able to stay afloat.
Yeah.
Have they been consistent with their mode of business, or have they evolved from what they were doing? As a, when you interviewed them, as a, when they started business, have they evolved from where they originally started from and are doing something else, or do they still stay consistent?
Yeah, so some of the under 40 CEOs have actually pivoted into other businesses. Some just because they know their time with their sometimes first love is done. I recall, speaking with Aisha Pandor is one of our under 40 CEOs from South Africa. She built a phenomenal company called Sweep South that has now expanded into other countries. I believe they're in Egypt and some other countries right now. But a time has come, and she knows that she would like to try a hand at something else. And so she has, put together the structure, and now recently announced the new CEO for Sweep South. And over time too, she has started a fund. So she's a venture capital, she runs a venture capital firm right now. And I think the last time we conversed, maybe she had about $22 million, of funds in that particular cycle. And she's decided to start because she's got a PhD in biomedical stuff, so she's an extremely smart scientist. So I think she's now trying to do some more mad scientist stuff, and she's launching a firm called Pandora Biomedicals. I think that's what it's called. And so, people are allowed to evolve for different reasons. In her case, it worked out so well. She's able to get a fantastic team in place, and she's doing really well. For others, maybe it didn't work out so well, and they decided, I've tried all I could with this particular venture, but I'm going to move into something else. Others have even sold their businesses, right, and decided to start something new, which is amazing. But the truth is, most of them have stuck with their businesses. People like Datola Juiton, who started in events, has now moved into real estate, so you never really know where a lot of these businesses may take you. I started hospitality at some point because I found, a lot of joy in serving people and all that, a restaurant and a lounge and all of that. But I sold it at some point to focus on, other businesses. So, yeah, it's. I don't think you need to stick to one thing. Like I said, don't fall in love too much in love with your business or your idea to the point where you're not willing to let go and try something new.
What I heard there was diversification. That's what I heard the most. What point do you get to? Do you get to a point where you say, you know what, I need to diversify? Or are there triggers or trends, or let me use the word nudges that make you say to yourself, okay, I think it's time to diversify, and the time is now?
So diversification may be because of survival, right? For instance, I recall with one of our businesses, we saw that revenue started to dwindle locally, but we knew that we could service an international market. So why not, right? So we decided to, have, product offerings that we could push into the international market, generate a lot of foreign exchange so that we can stay afloat. But you could also diversify for me. And I know that with most entrepreneurs who are quite creative, ideas are like a dime a dozen. So there's loads of ideas just floating around in our brains. And the reason I've done as much as I have is because I have something I consider both a gift and a curse. And it is that I can ideate and I can also execute. It's a gift and a curse. Because, most people you would find is either you have ideas and then somebody else can execute, or you can do both. So you just go ahead and do it, right? And the danger in that, and that's where the curse is, the danger in that is that you start something new or diversify too early before you've built structures to support the original business. If you haven't built enough structures to support that, processes that allow it run smoothly, and built people to run those processes and work in those structures, that particular organization could break down and fail whilst you're going on, moving on to the next thing. So for anyone who desires, I want to diversify just because, this one is doing really well. If that other business still requires a lot of your attention for it to function, please, it's not time to diversify just yet. But if you have business leaders in place, business unit leaders in place who can act, take it on, a general manager, for instance, a COO, they're all in place and they know the vision and can run with it, then maybe, and are equipped to run with it, then maybe it's time for you to try diversification.
So speaking of impact and vision for the future, what role do you believe young entrepreneurs will play in shaping the business landscape in Nigeria?
What role will they play? The young people, role will they play? Young entrepreneurs,
yes,
they are the future of business in Nigeria, period. So the truth is, with time, a lot of the business leaders in place today, so who are say in their 50s, maybe in their 60s, they're going to have to make way, right? So there will be some younger people that would step into their positions. And, because succession planning is something that a lot of organizations are taking very seriously now, because we all realize now that a lot of the enterprises we're building have to outlive us. And we also know that, just like some of those who went before us, who were planning and building their organizations around their children and family, that some of those children and family may not be interested in those businesses you're building, and may decide, a lot of the kids now hardly ever, they're in Brazil, they're working in Portugal, they don't care about your little business back in Nigeria or Africa. They don't really care anymore. So how can you build, this succession without the young people? A younger CEO has to take over at some point, and we're beginning to witness that happen. Now, for the entrepreneurs and those who are coming in with fresh ideas, fresh ways of doing things, they own the future. They obviously own it, because there's no industry that won't experience the threat of extinction if they don't allow for younger people, fresh ideas to flow in. Because these guys are coming with tech that some of you know nothing about. They're coming up with, they're even building original solutions. If you don't tap into it early, you'd go extinct. So the truth is, under 40 CEOs own the future of business in Africa.
Giving practical examples or references to under 40 CEOs, what advice would you give an SME who wants to either scale, pivot, now looking at the Nigerian landscape and the way SMEs are referred to here, and the policies that are usually in place? What are the practical steps that you can you can advise an entrepreneur to take one step at a time?
Okay, so you're ready to scale, right? And you want to know what the next step should be. So we're climbing a ladder or some steps here. I think first of all, you need to look at your structure. Let's look at it as a building, right? So what did you have in place before? I'm going to use the analogy of a building. So we're currently sitting in a bungalow, right? But we're trying to go 10 floors up. So what's the first thing we do? We want to go back and check the foundation and see if that foundation, the structure of the foundation, can support the 10-story building. And what you would usually find is that that foundation can support it. So what you may need to do first, to go up, you need to come down. So you have to tear down the initial structure and go back to the foundation to make sure that the structure there supports it. And what is the structure? Processes. You know, we talk about standard operating procedures. Sometimes it looks almost foolish, almost stupid. But yeah, I mean, if I have somebody who says tomorrow I am leaving this organization, right? I should be able to fill that role within maybe a week with the least qualified individual, but have a manual, step-by-step guide for that person to follow to make sure that there are no lapses. Will the person make mistakes in the early days? Yes. Yeah. But there's already documentation, and that documentation is the process. Those processes lend to the structure. Now, once you have the structure in place, then the next step, you've done the foundation, right? Then you want to build the first story. When you go to the first story, what do builders usually do? I think they do some checks, structural checks, to make sure that, okay, this first is solid enough, the decking is solid enough to carry the next, and then they go to the next, and they check again, and they go to the next, and they check again. So those checks, in fact, why are you scaling? Why do people want to scale in the first place? Because they feel they can serve a bigger market, right? Yeah. They feel that their market is way bigger than they're serving. So maybe you're only, getting a percentage, 1% of the pie, and you're now thinking, I want to get to 10%. So of course I need to scale, to produce enough to cater to the demand, right? So, but one of the things that we converse about all the time is doing a market analysis is extremely, extremely important, because you might feel that you've seen a gap in the market, but is there a market in that gap? That is one question that, so you think, oh, it's a big market. No, have you really confirmed? Yes, we see the gap. But how much of a market exists
within that gap?
Within that gap, before you start to build structures to produce more, to market more, to distribute more, to just do more, right? And you need to be sensitive to the economic pulse. You need to just feel the pulse of the market, right, before making decisions like that. Because, for instance, I believe that for most businesses, this is a time, like one of our under 40 CEOs said, even if you throw a bomb in a building and it blows up the entire building and people get killed, what doesn't get killed? Roaches. They always find their way out, right? And he told me, he said, I want to be the roach for the next 7 years who doesn't die, no matter what. So sometimes you need to look around and say, is this the right time to even scale this business? If it's not the right time, okay, how much of a market can I retain that would sustain my current structure? How do I manage my finances more? How do I, ensure that my overheads are not bleeding us to a point where, we might need to shut down. So those may be conversations to have, but I'm assuming that you've taken all those into consideration, and then you've set up your foundation to go. And as you go up, just know you need more people, need better structures, better processes, better efficiency, better monitoring. And yeah, at that point, I'll just shake your hands and wish you the very best.
And I'll see you at the top. Okay, I really liked that. That's very, very insightful.
I hope so.
How important is community building, networking, and being able to leverage on these connections that you have built as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as an SME?
So how important is networking and building communities? Networking, I don't even call it, networking. I call it, I see it as it's a currency, right? And social currency. It's something you can, what is currency? Something you can spend. Right? So it's something that's very important. I believe in building relationships upwards and downwards, right? Because most people tend to focus on those that have gone ahead of them. Like, how can I get to this guy and leverage him to get into certain rooms, or get him to, maybe mentor me, hold my hands, guide me. But there are people who are also coming behind. And I've mentioned to you that the future is with them. And whatever it is you're building today is for them. So you better be engaging and talking and networking down as you go up. And I don't think any relationship is wasted, right? I don't think any contact should be treated with levity, because you never know who is going to open a door for you. I'll give you a certain instance with one of our under 40 CEOs based in Abuja at the time. I recall that it was the security man who barely spoke English, right? How's a guy who told, then she was doing interior decor, right? And this gentleman, the security guy, came to her like, Madam, there's a project somewhere, and somebody, I said, maybe you can do it for them. It's like, what's this guy talking about? Like, dude, just open the gate and let me go. I said, no, there's somebody I need you to talk to. And so eventually she's like, you know what, let me just make this guy feel good. Oh yeah, who is the person? So they go meet this person, and then they drove to this spot, and then this spot had the carcass of what would be 100-unit estate. 100 units of buildings. And the carcass was there. They hadn't roofed, and the gentleman who owned the project just said, I need somebody to just finish this project, furnish it, and that's what. And then she took it on and executed it, made a lot of money. Imagine she didn't pay attention. She's like, don't worry, I'm not interested, tell them to get it because of who it's coming from, right? So you never know. And then there are gatekeepers everywhere. Whether it's the security man, whether it's, there's a way, people tend to want to treat those people. But that can be the difference between, and I have another mentor of mine, he's a billionaire, oil and gas industry, and he tells me he doesn't joke with the drivers of certain people in NNPC, and he doesn't joke with the front desk. All of them he has a relationship with, because sometimes they're the ones that, guy is at Ikoyi Club right now, if you want to catch him, because this night he's traveling. And he's just come to, he's there right now, he's playing squash in the squash court. And he goes there, he finalizes a deal and moves. So you must not, I was in our meeting yesterday, because on Mondays we have, general meetings, and we watch this TED Talk. And, I remember we were talking, and I said, guys, remember the last few times I had to go to a restaurant myself, I just saw someone sitting across, in NYC uniform, and, I just walked across and sat down. Do you mind if I sit here? And I started to engage. And today the person follows me. The person is saying, I've always wanted to build a business. The person is saying, I follow Under 40 CEOs. I'm looking to join Under 40 CEOs. I love what is going on there. And you never know. That could be a catalyst for something in their generation as far as the business is concerned. You never just know.
You never know.
So it helps that I love people, but you know, if it's a skill that everybody needs to build, walk into rooms, meet people, get to find out what their pain points are. You might even have a solution to their problem, something that won't even cost you. You would solve a problem for the person, and you know, the person is like, you know, I would love to do something for you. Or it's just currency just waiting there to be used one day. You may just walk into a place and the person is right there and said, no way, this person gets ahead of the queue and gets this business. You never know. So please, by all means, build relationships, nurture relationships, and when it's time, you would start to see it, you know, just pay back.
Last question I would like to ask you. Knowing all that you know now, and knowing some more, what would you tell yourself, advise yourself 20 years ago? What would you tell your 20-year-old?
My 20-year-old self. I would tell my 20-year-old self to relax. Relax. You take yourself way too seriously. Just relax. Things will fall in place. You're doing the right things. These things only just take time. But just make sure that with this, with every single experience, you're growing. With every single failing, you learn. Because people don't actively learn. You see people making the same mistakes over and over and over again. It's because they don't take the learnings. So dude, for this mistake, how did you make it? What were the pitfalls there? How did you drop there? How do you make sure you don't next time? Take that and boom, it becomes a part of you. So you're growing that way. That's what I would advise, man. And then I would say, focus. Focus. Don't be distracted. There are too many ideas in your head right now. Please just pen them down and just focus on that one, because once you crack that one, it would open the doors to more. And then forget about this passion business. Follow your passion. Follow the money. Follow the profit. All those things you're passionate about, please just write them down. Put them somewhere. Because the goal, I tell people, the goal of running a business, of having a career, of doing all of the things we do, is financial independence. And when you get to a point where your investments are yielding passive income and you no longer have to lift a finger for you to make enough money or get enough resources to live the lifestyle that you want, then please, by all means, follow your passion.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you for your time. I've learned a lot, and I'm very sure other people would pick 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 things from all you've said. So it's been a very, very insightful time sitting here with you, Mr. Fab.
Thank you very much for having me.